Again, welcome, dear friends, to our satsang this morning. Our verse for discussion today, which Arunji shared in the notice that he sent around for satsang, is verse 6 from Isha Upanishad. Those of you who were here on the last occasion will recall that we discussed the first verse of the Isha Upanishad. So in this series of satsangs, I am taking up a few very important verses from our Hindu sacred texts and offering and sharing with you my meditations on these verses. So last time we looked at the verse 1 of the Isha Upanishad, Isha Vasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bhunjitha ma grida kasya svidhanam. So this verse asked us, invited us to see everything existing in God, in Isha. Isha Vasyam idam sarvam, whatever exists. Yat kincha, whatever exists in this world of change is to be seen as existing within the divine. Give up greed and enjoy. Tena tyaktena bhunjita ma grida kasya svidhanam. Do not covet the wealth of another's wealth. This is what we discussed on the last occasion. So today, as I said, we will discuss verse 6 of the Isha Upanishad. So let us begin today's verse with the Sanskrit text. Yastu sarvāṇi bhūtānyātmanyevānupaśyati sarvabhūteṣu cātmānaṃ tato na vijugupsate. Yastu sarvāṇi bhūtānyātmanyevānupaśyati sarvabhūteṣu cātmānaṃ tato na vijugupsate. This is the verse, the original verse in Sanskrit. So as with the first verse, this verse also invites us to see something. Anupaśyati. Paśyati is the verb to see, but here the prefix anu is added on to it. Anupaśyati, see something. But anupaśyati means to see it well, to see it continuously, not intermittently, not sporadically, but continuous, close, attentive seeing. And as I'm sure you will note, that the seeing that is described in this verse is used in the sense of understanding, knowing or understanding, not physical seeing, since what we are invited to see is not a physical object. Even in everyday modes of speech, we use the verb to see as a synonym for knowing, to know. As when we say, I see what you mean, I see your point, so it's used as a synonym for understanding, and that's the same in this verse. So what are we invited to see? To see closely and continuously. Anupaśyati. We are asked to see sarvāṇi bhūtāni, all beings. The Sanskrit here is very accessible. Sarvāṇi bhūtāni. We are invited to see all beings. Ātmani eva. Ātmani in. We're invited to see all beings as existing in Atman. And sarvabhūteṣu cātmānaṃ. And also to see Atman existing in all beings. So to see all beings existing in the Atman sarvāṇi bhūtāni ātmani eva, and Atman alone, eva, and sarvabhūteṣu ca cātmānaṃ, and to see the Atman in all beings. There is a very similar verse in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, some of you may remember. Sarvabhūtaśtamātmānaṃ sarvabhūtāni cātmāni. Almost identical. Sarvabhūtaśtamātmānaṃ sarvabhūtāni cātmāni. To see Atman in all beings and all beings in Atman. That's the opening statement of this verse. So clearly, if all beings, if everything that exists only in what the verse here speaks of as Atman, if all things exist in Atman, and if Atman exists in all things, then clearly Atman is a reality without any limits or without any boundaries. It is bigger than everything, in other words. So Atman is used here in this verse, as is quite common in the Upanishads, as a synonym for Brahman. So in the Upanishads, the words Atman and Brahman, which in fact, Brahman comes from the root Brihat, which means big, without any limits. These two words are often used interchangeably as synonyms to point out their identity between Atman and Brahman. So we have, for example, the famous line from Mandukya Upanishad that this Atman is Brahma. I am Atma Brahma. This is known as one of the great sentences, Mahavakya, in the Upanishads. So all beings exist in the Atman and Atman in all beings because, as I've said, Atman is bigger than the biggest and also smaller than the smallest. That which contains something has to be bigger than what it contains, and that which is present in everything has to be smaller than everything. So you have the very beautiful line in Katha Upanishad, Anoraniyan Mahato Mahiyan Atmasya Jantor Nihita Guhayam. A very beautiful text that the Atman that exists in the heart of all beings, Nihito Jantuhu Nihitaha. The Atman that exists in the heart of all beings is Anoraniyan, it is bigger than the biggest. And Anoraniyan, smaller than the smallest, Mahato Mahiyan, bigger than the biggest. So it is bigger than anything that we could conceive as being big, and smaller than anything that we could conceive as being small. And when the Upanishad, as in the Katha Upanishad, Jantor Nihito Guhayam, when it speaks of the Atman existing in the heart of all beings, it is not the physical heart that the text has in mind. Of course, Atman also exists in the physical heart, and the physical heart also exists in the Atman. But the heart here, Guha, the heart here, is the place where one's sense of self, the I, the aham, exists, emerges. That is the heart of your being, where you have that sense of I, where all thoughts emerge, where all feelings emerge. There is no sense of I, there is no I-ness without Atman. So Atman is the light of awareness underlying the sense of I. That's the heart of one's being, where one has a feeling or the sense of I. And it is that because of which we have a sense of our own existence. We see, we think, we hear, we touch, we smell. It is not itself an object, but makes all objects known to us. All physical and mental objects are known only because of Atman. And since we understand, therefore, this Atman to be the self, the ground of the sense of self, we may translate this verse also to mean seeing all beings in one's own self and one's own self in all. That's another, we can also use those words to read this verse. So this is the basic truth that is enunciated in this verse. Seeing all beings in Atman, Brahman, or one's own self. We can change the words. They point to the same thing. And seeing everything in that reality, and that reality in everything. But the verse does not stop there. As in verse 1, it points out the implications. What does it mean to see oneself in all and all in oneself? To see everything in Brahman and Brahman in everything, to see everything in Atman and Atman in everything. What is the outcome? What are the consequences for our relationships with each other? How does it transform us? Verse 1 that we studied did the same. It laid out a truth, it enunciated a truth, and then it told us what it meant. It invited us to see the world as existing within God. And the consequence is enjoyment of the world without greed and freedom from envy. So what is the outcome here in this 6th verse? The text says, tato na vijugupsate. Tato na vijugupsate. Yastu sarvāṇi bhūtānyātmanyevānupaśyati. Sarvabhūteṣu tato na vijugupsate. As a consequence, tataha, as a result of this understanding, this knowledge, one is free from something. And the text uses the word vijugupsate, gupsa, jigupsa. One is free from what is called in Sanskrit jugupsa. Tatona vijugupsate, jugupsa. This word jugupsa has many meanings, fairly synonymous meanings. Hate, dislike, detesting, abhorring, denigrating, despising. All of these are meanings of the word jugupsa. So in other words, one who sees all beings in Brahman or Atman, in oneself, does not hate. You can stick with the meaning of hate, does not hate. But as I said, there are other meanings. Such a person does not detest, despise, denigrate others. Why? Why is this the outcome that this verse chooses to lift up for us? How does freedom from hate follow from this truth? So think with me. As we grow up as human beings, from childhood itself, our identities, who we are formed through a process of distinguishing ourselves from others by seeing differences. So this is normal, and might even be harmless. It is a necessary part of one's own growing up. For example, I am male and not female. So when I say I am male, I distinguish myself from other human beings who don't share my sex. I am American, not Italian. Or I am Italian American, not Indian American. I am Christian, not Hindu. I am Hindu, not Christian. I am Hispanic American, not African American. And I'm Indo-Trinidadian, not Afro-Trinidadian. I am Minnesota, not New Yorker. These are statements of fact. Harmless. Such distinctions, I would say, are harmless when they are merely descriptive. They are useful, descriptive statements that identify me in certain ways from other human beings. To say, for example, I am Hindu American, I am not Buddhist American, simply identifies my faith and my nationality. Now, when do such descriptive statements become problematic? When do they become problematic? The problem starts when such identities, such differences become the grounds or the causes for regarding oneself as superior to others and for hating and denigrating those who are different. So I'll repeat that. The problem starts when such identities and differences become the grounds and causes for regarding oneself as superior to others and for hating and denigrating those who are different. The problem starts when we create rankings, when we create hierarchies of various kinds based on skin color, ethnicity, religion, national origin, gender, add to the list, where we privilege our own identities and regard these as superior, and then we despise and we reject others as inferior and of lesser worth. I do not believe that there is a community that has not created such hierarchies at some time or the other. They are found across cultures, across traditions. We may even feel, when we create such hierarchies, we may even feel entitled to exploit others because we see differences as marks of inferiority and as opportunities to exercise power and control over them. How many examples are there in history and even in our times? Colonial empires seized, enslaved, and transported over 400 million Africans across the Atlantic, regarding them as subhuman and inferior. They were not seen as having a right to freedom and to dignity. The lands of indigenous people were seized by those who regarded their own religion and culture and race as superior. We are learning now in the United States and in Canada about indigenous children who were separated from their families and taken to boarding schools to be re-educated, to be remade in the image of the group regarding itself as superior. We are learning of their trauma as a consequence of being separated from their families It was not until 1978 in the United States that Native American ceremonies, rituals, and ways of worshiping were considered legal. Before 1978, a Native American could be arrested for performing his or her own religious ceremony. So identities become dangerous when our self-value requires that we devalue others and despise them. These descriptive identities are problematic when they become the basis, as I'm saying, for despising, marginalizing, and exploiting others. But there is another way in which they become problematic. Identities are deeply problematic when, I'll put it in this way, when they narrow and constrict our hearts. Identities are problematic when they narrow and constrict and shrink our hearts. What do I mean? A constricted heart, a shrunken heart, is one that limits itself to being concerned with the interests and well-being of his or her own group alone and not any other. Whether that group is a nation, a religious community, or ethnicity. A constricted heart, a shrunken heart, identifies only with the suffering of its own group, will protest against this suffering, and will be moved to action only when the interests of its own group are threatened. A constricted heart sees the suffering of others as deserved and justified suffering. When my group suffers, it is injustice. When the other suffers, it is justified. A constricted heart, a shrunken heart, treats members of his group as individuals, but stereotypes persons in other groups, painting them all with the same broad brush. Think of all the phrases that we are familiar with. They are lazy. They are criminals. They are greedy. They are terrorists. They are dirty. They are ignorant. Our group is diverse and multidimensional. Other groups are unidimensional, one-dimensional, and homogeneous. The care and compassion of the shrunken heart has thick boundaries, thick walls. So this Upanishad verse challenges us to think about groups and communities that we despise and denigrate. Jugupsa, towards whom we exercise what the verse calls jugupsa. There may be subgroups in our own communities. There may be those we see as outsiders. So we have to ask, what is the history? What is the history of our relationship with these groups? How are we agents? How are we the agents of suffering by denigrating and stereotyping them? Which groups are the objects of our jigupsa? Who do we devalue to assert our own value? Who do we devalue to assert our own value? Now, in order to hate, think with me again. Think with me. In order to hate another, to despise and to denigrate another, to justify what the verse calls jigupsa, we always make the argument in one form or another that members of the despised or the hated community are different from us. We do not share anything with them. We paint them as different. In other words, hate and then violence between one group and another is always predicated upon, is always prefaced, preceded by the denial of common identity or shared identity. Again, we could look to history, we could look to contemporary times. The Nazis in Germany rose to popularity by representing the Jews as an alien race, as exploiters, as cunning, as untrustworthy. What were they doing? They were denying any common identity with them. Many of these stereotypes persist to this day. And here in the United States and elsewhere, these continue to be sources of anti-Semitism. We learned during the past week alone, to bring it to a present example, that police officers in Louisville, Kentucky, here in the United States, called African Americans monkeys, animals, boys. This is jigupsa. These names, such names create the conditions for treating them as less than human. Jigupsa doesn't always require words. It can also be expressed with images. Another example. Native Americans are customarily portrayed with tomahawks in their hands and scalping knives, representing them as violent and barbarous in nature. And we know well how much Hollywood films perpetuated such stereotypes. These examples could be very easily multiplied. But the point is clear. It is difficult to hate and to practice violence towards beings in whom we see ourselves. That's why we always try to create the distance, the gap. We do not preface our denigration of others with the words, "We share with you a common humanity." To hate, we must deny our shared identity with others. To hate, we must deny our shared identity with others. Now, let's come back to that verse, the Upanishad verse. All of this is necessary to illumine, to shed light on the profound significance of this Upanishad teaching. To counteract hate, violence, and injustice towards others, this verse speaks of our unity, our shared identity with all. Yastu sarvāṇi bhūtānyātmanyevānupaśyati. We exist within the same infinite divine, who exists equally in all of us. And since, as I said, the one divine exists as the self of all, we see ourselves in everyone, and we understand that to hate another is to hate oneself. So this verse is calling to our attention to a fundamental unity, which is the antidote. The antidote. The vaccine, if I would use a contemporary word, which is the vaccine against the virus of hate. The vaccine against the virus of hate. And the significance which this tradition grants to this understanding of life's unity may be appreciated from the fact that the tradition says that if we do not understand or see this truth, anupaśyati, then we are as good as blind. you may recollect the beautiful verse of Bhagavad Gita. Samam sarveshu bhūtānyātmanyevānupaśyati tishtantam parameshwaram. Same truth. Samam sarveshu bhūtānyātmanyevānupaśyati, in all beings, seeing the same parameshwara, the same divine being. Vinashyatsva avinashyantam, the imperishable in everything perishable, the infinite in the finite. Yaf pashyati sapashyati. The one who sees this is the only one truly seeing. One who sees this truly sees. Yaf pashyati sapashyati. Until that time, then we all exist in a state of not seeing. The result of seeing this truth is that we learn to value other beings as we value ourselves, to treat others with the same dignity and respect that we would like to be treated. We do not value them, we do not exploit them, we do not instrumentalize them for our own selfish purposes, we do not stereotype them. This shared identity about which I am speaking on the basis of this verse is not, as you can see, based on a shared religion, a shared ethnicity, a shared culture, a shared nationality. These are important, and I'm not saying that they are not important. I'm not saying we should not value these dimensions of our identities. But these particularities, as beautiful as they are, they also exclude. Not everyone is an American. Not everyone is a Buddhist or a Muslim or a Christian or a Hindu. In the case of seeing everything in the one divine and the one divine in everything, no one is excluded. It is not an oppositional identity. It is not a divisive identity. No one and no thing is excluded. This verse describes the person who knows the truth of all beings in God and God in all beings as someone who is free from hate. Tato vijugupsate. And while freedom from hate is a negative way of stating the outcome, it says one who knows this truth is free from hate. Tato vijugupsate. So while freedom from hate is a negative way of stating this outcome, we must be very clear, the outcome is not negative. It does not mean that one has now moved from hate to indifference. The liberation from hate takes place because the constricted heart, the shrunken heart about which I spoke, is now opened in love. In a love that is inclusive, that embraces all beings. Let me put it this way. The opposite of hate is not indifference. It is love. Not to hate is not to be indifferent. It is to love. For many of us, this circle of love extends perhaps to our immediate families, and there is nothing wrong in loving one's family. In fact, we should love and care for our families deeply. And that love means that we are moved by their sorrows, and we rejoice when they are happy. For others, the circle may be a bit wider. It might extend to members of the shared religious group, the ethnic group, or perhaps even the nation. There's nothing wrong, as I said, in loving one's family, loving one's fellow countrymen and countrywomen, or those sharing one's culture. But in this verse, the teaching is that love should not stop there. Love should not stop there. Spiritual growth is the expansion of the heart in love. Spiritual growth is the expansion of the heart in love. And the ideal is a love without boundaries. A love that is not inhibited by geography, by nation, by language, by culture, by ethnicity. This is what this verse holds out to us and shows us, gives us the teaching that expands the heart. The French philosopher Voltaire described God in the following words: God is a circle whose center is everywhere and circumference nowhere. God is a circle whose center is everywhere and circumference nowhere. If we substitute the word love for God, we may speak of a circle with a center everywhere and is a circumference nowhere. And we will be speaking of the awakening to which this verse leads us. So let me finish with another Upanishad verse. This one from Kaivalya Upanishad. This teaching is so important. Kaivalya Upanishad in the 10th verse says, Yati nanyena hetuna. There is no other way. There is no other means. There's no other means for liberation. There's no other means for moksha. There's no other path besides what? Sarvabhūteṣu sarvabhūtāni cātmānaṃ. Sampashyan brahma paramam. Yati nanyena hetuna. There is no other way. There is no other path to liberation for those who are interested. But learning to see all in God and God in all. Sampashyan brahma paramam. Seeing the supreme Brahman in all and all in Brahman and including all in a boundless circle of love. There is no other way. Yati nanyena hetuna. There is no other way. If our spiritual path does not lead us to this way of loving, it is leading us in the wrong direction. If it constricts and shrinks our heart, it is leading us away from truth. I will stop there, except to say that this love to which this verse points also includes oneself. One has to include oneself. This truth, seeing Atman in all and all in Atman, must include oneself. Self-hate, in other words, is also contrary to this teaching. I can't love another also without loving myself. One who hates oneself can't love. So it means also, it calls us also to an embrace for our own selves, value in our own selves, reverence for one's own self as an outcome, forgiving oneself, being kind to oneself. All of these follow from this profound Upanishad teaching. Yastu sarvāṇi bhūtānyātmanyevānupaśyati sarvabhūteṣu cātmānaṃ tato vijugupsate. There is no higher teaching to be found. I now invite your thoughts, your comments, and I'll try to respond to your questions about what I shared today.
Well, thank you for the presentation. It's so appropriate for the times that we live in. Unless and until individuals such as you speak up so loudly and clearly for us, people will be going in the wrong track. The word that comes to my mind, being a physician by profession, is the organization around the world, Doctors Without Borders. So love should be exactly in the same fashion. You take care of the people regardless the ethnicity, background, country, religion they practice. The one point that you emphasized was the family togetherness, which is so important. And I think if you have somebody who's not doing the way it should be normally done, ethnically or ethically rather, family still comes together and gives them a hand, gives them a hug. And sometimes we are even more critical about our mothers because they go out of the way to, that mother gives that particular child even greater time and care, the people who are doing very good. And I think I'm glad that you emphasize the point of recognizing the presence of world which is pluralistic, where people come from different backgrounds. But the key is not only to recognize it, but as you rightly emphasize, is to celebrate the variation in the ethnicity and join them and appreciate their beauty and grandeur they bring to the larger society. So thanks again, appreciate it.
Thank you for those comments, Shashi. Yes, and the last point you made, is going to be one of the themes that I'll pick up, because there are verses in the Upanishads that talk about celebrating of differences, which is the phrase that you rightly use. And I would like to discuss one of those verses as part of this series. Thank you also for yes, Doctors Without Borders is an example of the practice of medicine in a very inclusive way. So those are wonderful examples. Yes, Desai ji, I see your hand up, and then Anand. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. It was absolutely outstanding and very, very nicely presented, the information. One comment I have, or the question I have, is we talked about other fellow human beings.
Yes.
But we should expand it even further and include all the animals and all the things that are there in the nature, because they are equally important. The diversity that Dr. Sone mentioned is also about all the other animals, all the other living creatures, as well as non-living creatures. So I was just wondering, what do you think about that thought?
Desai ji, I agree with you unreservedly. I didn't clearly, I could have moved in that direction in this talk, because, as you quite rightly said, if we look at the verse that we discussed, the verse is sarvabhūtānyātmanyevānupaśyati. It is not what we will call, it is certainly not anthropocentric. So your point is a very good reminder, And there are other verses that one could take up and address this, and I plan to do that. But yes, I'm thankful for the reminder that bhūtāni used in this verse and other verses should not be read as speaking only of human beings, but the care, the compassion that this verse invites us into must be extended also to all living beings, human and other than humans. It's a very good reminder about the implications of this verse. I thank you for that. Anandji?
I mean, to me, it seems that we must be able to discriminate. If we do not know that somebody's blood type is O versus A, etc., if we don't make those differences, obviously we could kill people. Similarly, if we don't make a difference between somebody who has plenty of money and somebody who is starving, that would not be appropriate either. In fact, all progress would stop if we lost our ability to distinguish. All scientific progress is based on being able to tell differences and explain differences. What is the difference between the sun and the earth, and so on. So I think discrimination, as you have yourself pointed out, being able to tell differences is critically important. So the only real question is, after having figured out these differences, what do we do with it, right? We can use that knowledge for doing something good, which we would not have been able to do had we simply said everything is God and everybody is equal, or we can use that knowledge for doing something bad. So that's the only part of it. It is not so much this idea that we are all the same. It is the idea that we are all different. Everything is different. But how do we use that knowledge for improving things as well, instead of destroying things? So I think that's the piece of it, which is where perhaps we need to focus more.
Anand, with all respect to what you have said, this was not the point of my lecture. I was very, very clear, and I hope everybody who listened to me saw that. I started by saying that, as we grow up, differences are important. This is how we form our identities, and they are necessary. But I also went on to say, and to identify in very specific ways how differences become problematic. I don't want to go over my lecture again, because I thought I very carefully structured it to emphasize those points. I never, either here or anywhere else, speak about the homogenizing of differences or saying that differences are not at all important. Even when Dr. Sani spoke, I agreed fully with him about celebrating differences. And therefore, I find it very difficult to go in the direction in which you are going. Certainly, the differences are very important, but differences can also be construed in ways, as I said, that lead to rankings and to hierarchies that devalue and others, or unvalue, or value some more and devalue others. And this is where they become problematic. And therefore, we can't stop only with differences. We can't stop only with differences. We have to have a vision both of differences, but also where this verse calls us to a fundamental unity that exists at the heart of all things. This is where the Upanishads are taking us. And it's the same in the Bhagavad Gita, that speaks about 3 ways of seeing the world. One is to see the world as a world of difference only. And the secondly is to see difference, but also to see the underlying unity in which all differences exist. And I think that is, that is the vision that this verse calls us. So I am not at all leveling differences or de-emphasizing differences or asking people to love only when differences are obliterated. I think the vision here is one that is unity in the midst of diversity, if I put it in that way. That is the vision to which the Upanishads are calling us. Yes.
Yeah, I think we are agreeing more than what it seems.
We may be, but the way in which you formulated your question didn't give that impression, in all respect to you.
So let me, I just want to make sure that step one is to see differences. That's what I'm saying.
That's natural. Yes.
That's what I'm saying. Step two is to figure out, how can I use this knowledge to do something good? If I don't see the difference between poor people and rich people, I am not in a position to do something good. Okay, that's step two. Step to avoid is to see these differences and then use that knowledge to do something bad, like discriminate on the basis of color, etc., etc.
Yes.
So that's what I am saying.
No, I agree with you. And just to clarify, the verse is saying, but if we don't see the fundamental unity, then we may not have the motivation to use those differences to do good. We need the vision of unity, what I call the shared identity, which is where the Upanishad is putting its vision, to be able to do good in the midst of differences and to avoid what you call as your third option, which is the exploitation of differences to inflict suffering on others. So I think we agree, and let's leave it here and I'll move on to Madhavi. Madhavi, could you unmute yourself, please?
When he was mentioning about, he gave the example of blood groups, that was a perfect example of, you find different blood groups, but you don't devalue A is better than B or O. You find, yes, it is valuable in the practical sense, but you don't devalue just because there is a difference. That's the whole crux of what you both are really talking of, the same thing, I think, here. Talking about rich and poor, I was in a personal, my personal one incident. I remember somebody had called me to ask about my experience about my kids going to the University of Southern California. And their son or daughter was planning to go to that university. And I gave my honest opinion that it is a private school. It is a school where rich kids go. And what I advise my kids is, if you go there and you focus on the studies and not focus on who is coming in an Audi and who is coming in a BMW, I'm okay to send you there. When I said this to the people who are asking my opinion, they took it in a wrong way, that I hate rich people. So, I don't hate rich people, but there are problems with being rich. That was what I was trying to point out too. So how we interpret the differences, it's really about individual maturity of our understanding. It gets really complex when you're talking to people.
Thank you for your comment.
I can see that by listening to your lecture, we can try to be a global human or global life form. But we have to realize what is happening in other person's mind. We can't forget the lessons of history. Otherwise, my globalization goes to trash, because we have been, say, victim of this from other side also, in a very organized way, where you are hated and they will not stop till you are totally destroyed, right? So enemy realization is one of the things. We can only practice this once we are in a safe boundary and when we have the resources to sustain ourselves. Outside that, it's anyone's guess. So there is no, once you are in that situation, so any opinion?
Thank you for that comment, Arunji. Surely, you know, we can't be unrealistic about dangers that come to us sadly from other human beings, and that's what you are lifting up here. But at the same time, what the Upanishads are teaching us is that others may choose how they respond to us, but we always choose how we respond to others. And so it is clearly inviting us, as you quite rightly said, to a universal love. But at the same time, nothing that I have said or nothing that the Upanishad has said here is contradictory to fundamental principles of self-defense and protecting oneself or one's family or one's nation from unjust threats. But sometimes, you know, we will focus on that and then we don't see the beautiful ideal to which the text calls us. And I think that if there's any hope for our world today, I think, and you may not agree with me, but I think it's really returning back to such fundamental teachings of the Upanishads that are universal teachings, humane teachings that focus on the well-being and the flourishing of all of us who inhabit this planet. So we should not develop the rhetoric of hostility and hate even when others are hostile and express hate to us. This is not how we will solve our problems.
Dr. Rambachan, this is Pansy.
Yes. Oh,
And
Pansy.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciated your statement that kind of hit me, is that, and I put it in the chat box too, that the spiritual growth in us will not happen unless there is expansion in the heart for love and love all beings without boundaries. And I think that really resonated with me, and I appreciated you saying that.
Thank you so much, Pansy. I tell you something also about that statement. I'm glad you heard me say that. The reason is I did not put that statement into my text until this morning itself. It just flashed into me. And I said, because when I prepared my text earlier this week, I did not have those words in it. Those words were only put shortly before I turned on. And I'm grateful that you heard those words.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that. And those words spoke to me also, Pansy. Not only to you who heard it, but also to me. So I'm grateful.
Thank you.
Advi, you wanted to say a final comment, please?
You know, when Arunji was talking about the issue about when somebody is hostile to us, I was reminded of a statement made by Veer Savarkar. So you know how much passionate he was and anti-British he was at that time during the struggle for independence. But he made a statement that my fight, my hostility, my resistance to them is only for them to leave my country. Tomorrow, if they are invaded by somebody else, I would not hesitate to go and help them out. So when we are doing it, it is in the context of what we need to resist. It's not hatred towards them. That understanding was there in these great people, you know. So they were very clear that the issue of universal love did not contradict their practical approach when they have to oppose or fight against someone or something.
Oh, thank you, Madhavi, and thank you, dear brothers and sisters, for joining our satsang this morning. I shared this verse with you. I shared what this verse means to me. I shared how this verse challenges me, and how this verse can help me to become, as Pansy said, how to expand my heart in love. When we read a text, we can focus on everything that is problematic in what the text teaches us. We can also ask ourselves a very simple question. How does this teaching enrich my life? How can I transform? How is this teaching an invitation to a self-transformation that makes me a better human being and also enriches everyone with whom I come into contact and everyone with whom I am in relationship? And I hope this is where, this is what I wanted to share, and I hope this is what it means to all of you. So thank you, and let us conclude with words of prayer. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.